I was 68 years old, and until that Thursday evening in late October, I believed I still had a family worth living for. I'd been carrying a phone charger up the stairs. My son Daniel had mentioned his was broken when I heard the voices drifting through the partially open bedroom door. My old house had thin walls, a fact I'd never minded before. Now, standing frozen 3 steps from the landing, that architectural flaw became the messenger of a truth I'd never wanted to know. Just be patient, honey. That was Daniel's voice, low and conspiratorial. The doctor said his heart isn't what it used to be. He won't last another year, maybe 2 at most. The house will be ours soon enough. My hand tightened around the charger cord. My daughter-in-law, Christine, responded with a giggle that turned my stomach. Thank God. Then we can finally sell this ancient place and move somewhere that doesn't smell like mothballs and old man. He's basically dead weight at this point, Danny. We're wasting our prime years playing nursemaid. Keep your voice down, Daniel hissed, but he was laughing too. Once he's gone, we're looking at $500,000. Easy. Maybe more if we renovate before listing. We just have to hold out a little longer. I stood paralyzed in the hallway, the charger still clutched in my weathered hand. My heart, that supposedly failing heart, pounding so hard I thought it might actually prove them right and give out right there on my own staircase. I didn't march in to confront them. I didn't shout or curse or demand explanations. I simply turned around, walked back down the stairs with mechanical precision, placed the charger on the kitchen counter, and sat down at the table where I'd shared thousands of meals with my late wife, Margaret. And for the first time since her funeral 3 years ago, I allowed myself to think like a man who'd been betrayed by the only family I had left. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. To understand how I arrived at this moment, eavesdropping on my own execution date, you need to understand how deeply I'd sacrificed for the 2 people upstairs currently celebrating my impending death. I'd been married to Margaret for 42 years. We'd bought the 4-bedroom colonial in 1987 when the neighborhood was still affordable and full of young families. We'd raised Daniel here, watched him graduate high school in the living room, sent him off to college from this very driveway. The house held every memory that mattered. When Margaret died of pancreatic cancer in 2022, the house became simultaneously my sanctuary and my prison. Every corner whispered her name, every creak of the floorboards sounded like her footsteps. I'd considered selling, moving into something smaller, something without ghosts. Then Daniel called. It was January 2023, bitter cold, and Daniel's voice carried the particular strain of desperation that fathers recognize instinctively. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I know it's a lot, but Christine and I, we're in trouble. The story came tumbling out. Daniel had been laid off from his marketing position just before Christmas. Christine's job at the boutique wasn't enough to cover their apartment rent. They were 2 months behind on payments, facing eviction, drowning in credit card debt. They had nowhere else to turn. Can we stay with you? Just temporarily, Dad. Just until I find something new. 3 months, maybe 4 at most. I remembered the silence that followed my immediate yes. I remembered Daniel's voice cracking with relief, with gratitude that sounded so genuine it made my chest ache with the pure joy of being needed by my son again. Thank you, Dad. God, thank you. We'll contribute however we can. We won't be a burden, I promise. They moved in on a gray Saturday in February. Daniel and Christine arrived with a U-Haul truck packed with furniture, clothes, and the accumulated detritus of their failed independence. I helped them carry boxes up to the master bedroom, mine and Margaret's old room, the one with the most space. You take it, I'd insisted when Daniel protested. I'm fine in the smaller room. You two need space. That should have been my first warning sign, how quickly they accepted my sacrifice without argument. The first month was pleasant enough. Daniel applied for jobs daily, or so he claimed. Christine picked up extra shifts at the boutique. We ate dinner together, watched television as a family, and I allowed myself to believe I wasn't alone anymore. The house felt alive again, filled with voices and movement and purpose. But 3 months became 6. 6 became 9. Daniel's job search seemed to lose urgency. The applications he mentioned submitting grew vaguer, less frequent. Christine quit the boutique in May, claiming the manager was toxic and the commute exhausting. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned about finding new employment. Meanwhile, I paid for everything. The mortgage had been satisfied years ago, but there were still property taxes, homeowners' insurance, utilities that seemed to skyrocket with 2 additional people using electricity, water, heat, and air conditioning without restraint. The grocery bills tripled. Daniel's car insurance lapsed, so I added him to my policy. Christine needed dental work. Could Dad help just this once? The water heater broke. Could Dad cover the replacement? I paid every bill without complaint. This was my son. This was family. Margaret would have done the same. I'd worked for 37 years as a civil engineer for the county, retiring with a modest pension and decent savings. I'd been careful, frugal, planning for a retirement that would carry Margaret and me through our golden years. After she died, I'd maintained that discipline, living simply, spending little. My pension covered my needs with room to spare, but supporting 3 adults on a fixed income slowly drained my reserves. I found myself dipping into savings more frequently, watching the numbers in my bank account shrink month by month. Still, I said nothing. Family was supposed to help each other. This was temporary. Except it wasn't temporary anymore. By October, Daniel and Christine had been living with me for 20 months. Not 3 months, not 6. 20 months of me subsidizing their entire existence while they contributed nothing but dirty dishes and vague promises of, "Soon, Dad, we'll get back on our feet soon." And then came that Thursday evening, the charger in my hand, the conversation through the cracked door, and the sudden crystal-clear realization that I wasn't helping my son rebuild. I was being farmed, harvested, waited out like a crop that just needed to wither and die so the real owners could finally cash in. I sat at the kitchen table that night long after the house fell silent. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind raced through every interaction of the past 20 months, re-examining each conversation through this new, poisonous lens. The way Christine sighed dramatically whenever I asked her to pick something up from the store on her way home from wherever she'd been. The way Daniel's eyes glazed over whenever I talked about my day, my memories, my life. The way they'd steadily taken over more and more of the house. Their workout equipment in the living room, Christine's craft supplies colonizing the dining room table, Daniel's golf clubs blocking the hallway. They weren't guests grateful for shelter. They were squatters counting down the days until the leaseholder died. The sun rose on Friday morning, and I was still sitting at that table, but I was no longer the same man who'd climbed those stairs with a phone charger the night before. That man had been a father, a helper, a believer in family bonds. This man was something different, something colder, something that understood betrayal required consequences. I didn't immediately formulate my plan. That would have been reckless, emotional, the kind of impulsive reaction that felt good for 5 minutes before destroying everything. No, I was an engineer. I'd spent 4 decades designing systems, calculating loads, anticipating points of failure. I would approach this the same way I'd approached every complex problem in my professional life, with patience, precision, and thorough documentation. For 2 weeks, I did nothing except observe and research. I watched Daniel and Christine with new eyes, documenting patterns I'd previously dismissed as quirks or temporary laziness. Daniel didn't apply for jobs. He played video games in the bedroom until noon, then spent afternoons at the gym or meeting friends for lunch. Christine wasn't job hunting either. She spent her days shopping online, meeting friends for coffee, getting her nails done. They were living like trust fund children, waiting for their inheritance to mature. I also began examining my own situation with the cold assessment of an auditor. I made lists, I reviewed documents, I called my lawyer, my bank, my insurance companies. And with each conversation, each reviewed contract and deed and policy, I discovered something that made my newly hardened heart beat with grim satisfaction. I held every single card. The house was entirely in my name. When Margaret and I had purchased it, we'd held it as joint tenants, meaning when she died, ownership automatically transferred completely to me. I'd never added Daniel to the deed. I'd mentioned doing so once or twice, promised to get around to it eventually, but I'd never actually executed the paperwork. The house was mine, completely, legally, solely mine. Every utility account, electricity, gas, water, internet, trash collection, was in my name. The car in the driveway, a 7-year-old Accord that Daniel drove daily, was titled to me. The insurance policy covering it listed me as the primary holder. Even the Netflix account Daniel and Christine used nightly was linked to my credit card. They controlled nothing. They owned nothing. They existed entirely within an infrastructure of dependencies they'd never bothered to examine because they assumed I would simply die and leave them everything. That assumption was about to become their undoing. I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer, Martin Brenner, an old friend who'd handled mine and Margaret's estate planning for decades. We met on a Tuesday afternoon at Martin's office, a wood-paneled sanctuary that smelled of old books and furniture polish. "Robert, good to see you," Martin said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of a man who still played tennis twice weekly at 73. "What brings you in? Nothing wrong, I hope?" "I need to revise my will," I said, settling into the leather chair across from Martin's desk. "Substantially." Martin's eyebrows rose, but he simply opened his laptop and pulled up my current documents. "All right. Walk me through what you want to change. What I wanted was simple. Remove Daniel completely as beneficiary. My current will left everything to Daniel. The house, my savings, my pension survivor benefits, my life insurance policy. It was the default arrangement, the expected pattern. Parents leave their estate to their children. Martin had drafted it shortly after Margaret's death, and I'd signed it without much thought. Of course Daniel would inherit. Who else? Now I dictated new terms. My primary beneficiary would be Margaret's sister, Helen, who lived in Arizona and had always treated me with kindness and respect. Helen would inherit the house and the bulk of my savings. Various charitable organizations would receive smaller bequests. Daniel would receive exactly $1 and a detailed letter explaining why. Robert, Martin said carefully, fingers paused over his keyboard. I have to ask, this is a dramatic change. Are you certain? Have you and Daniel had some kind of falling out? I almost laughed. Falling out implied a confrontation, harsh words, a mutual parting of ways. What Daniel and I had was much simpler and much worse. A one-sided conversation I'd accidentally overheard, revealing that my son was eagerly awaiting my death. I'm certain, I said, and I want it executed immediately, this week if possible. Martin studied me for a long moment, then nodded. It's your estate, Robert. I'll have the documents ready by Friday. You'll need 2 witnesses for the signing, but we can provide those here. Good. I stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. I need information about eviction procedures in this state, for a situation where adult family members are living in my home without a lease. Martin's expression shifted to something between concern and understanding. How long have they been there? 20 months? That's long enough to establish residency, which complicates things slightly, but not insurmountably. They're not paying rent? Not a penny. Then they're tenants at will. You'll need to provide written notice, typically 30 days in this state, but check your local ordinances. Some municipalities require 60 or even 90 days for residents who've been in place over a year. Martin pulled out a legal pad and began writing. I can refer you to an attorney who specializes in landlord-tenant law. They'll handle the paperwork correctly so it holds up if this gets challenged. It will definitely get challenged, I said quietly. Then you want this done perfectly. Martin tore off the sheet and handed it to me. Call Sarah Martinez. Tell her I sent you. She'll take care of you. I left Martin's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Control. I wasn't a passive victim waiting to be erased from my own life story. I was an architect designing the exact structure of consequences Daniel and Christine deserved. Friday afternoon, I returned to Martin's office and signed the new will in the presence of 2 paralegals who served as witnesses. Martin notarized the document, sealed it in an envelope, and filed it officially with the county. It's done, Martin said. Your new will supersedes all previous versions. Daniel inherits $1 and 1 letter. Perfect. I shook his hand. Thank you, Martin. Robert, before you go, are you all right? I mean, beyond the obvious situation with your son. You seem, different. I considered the question. Was I all right? My son wished me dead. My daughter-in-law laughed about it. My savings were depleted. My trust was shattered. My home had become a stage where I played the unwitting fool to an audience of 2 people who saw me as an obstacle rather than a human being. I will be, I said. Very soon. The following Monday, I met with Sarah Martinez, the eviction attorney Martin had recommended. Sarah was sharp, direct, and utterly unsentimental about the law. Exactly what I needed. Here's the situation, she said after I'd explained everything. They've established residency, so you can't just change the locks and throw their stuff on the lawn. That's illegal and opens you to lawsuits. You need to follow proper procedure. Which is? You provide written notice, delivered either in person or via certified mail, stating they must vacate within 60 days. That's the standard in your county for residents of over 12 months. The notice must include specific language, specific formatting. I'll draft it for you. After 60 days, if they haven't left, you file for eviction in court. A judge issues an order, the sheriff enforces it. 60 days is a long time, I said. Sarah's smile was thin. It doesn't have to be. You can make those 60 days very uncomfortable. How? You control the utilities, correct? Electric, water, heat? Everything. You can discontinue service to your own property. You have that right. You're not legally obligated to provide utilities to non-paying tenants. Turn everything off. Life gets very difficult very quickly when you're showering at the gym and eating cold cereal by candlelight. I felt something dark and satisfying bloom in my chest. That's legal? Perfectly legal. The services are in your name. They're your responsibility and your prerogative. Now, they might try to turn things back on, but the accounts are yours. The utility companies won't accept orders from anyone else without your authorization. Sarah leaned forward. You can also remove any property that belongs to you. The car, for instance. If it's titled in your name, it's your car. Store it somewhere they can't access it. What about the house itself? Can I lock them out? No, not until the eviction is complete. They have residency rights for those 60 days, even if you're making them miserable. But after that, once the sheriff escorts them out, you can change every lock, and they'll have no legal recourse. I hired Sarah on the spot. She drafted the eviction notice that afternoon, 2 copies, one for Daniel, one for Christine, each worded with the precise legal language required to survive court challenges. Sarah would serve them personally, creating a documented record of delivery that couldn't be disputed. When do you want to do this? Sarah asked. I thought about timing. I thought about impact. I thought about Daniel and Christine upstairs right now in my house, probably discussing what color they'd paint the living room once I was dead. Let's wait 2 weeks, I said. I have some preparations to make first. Over the next 14 days, I systematically dismantled the support structure that propped up Daniel and Christine's comfortable existence. I visited the electric company and scheduled a service disconnection. I did the same with the gas company, the water utility, and the internet provider. All disconnections would occur on the same day, the day after I served them with eviction notices. I wanted them to wake up in darkness, unable to shower, unable to stream their shows, unable to maintain even the thinnest veneer of normalcy. I went to the bank and removed Christine's name from my checking account. I'd added her months ago to make it easier for her to buy groceries, a decision that now made me nauseous. I confirmed that my pension deposits would continue into a new account, one they couldn't access. I moved the bulk of my remaining savings into that new account as well. I contacted my car insurance company and removed Daniel as an authorized driver. Then I called a private storage facility across town and rented a climate-controlled unit. One Sunday morning when Daniel and Christine drove to brunch with friends, I had the Accord towed to that storage unit, where it would sit, perfectly legal and completely inaccessible. I packed my personal belongings, clothes, photographs, Margaret's jewelry, important documents, the few items that carried genuine meaning, and moved them to Helen's house in Arizona. Helen had been horrified when I'd called to explain the situation, and she'd immediately offered me a place to stay for as long as I needed. That boy, she'd hissed over the phone, her voice shaking with fury. Margaret would be ashamed. Come here, Robert. Come stay with me. Let those vultures rot. By the end of those 2 weeks, I'd quietly removed every trace of myself from the house that Daniel and Christine had already mentally claimed. My bedroom was empty. My bathroom was cleared. My office was stripped. To a casual observer, it would look like I'd simply vanished, which was precisely the effect I wanted. I left on a Tuesday morning in early November. I woke at 5, before Daniel and Christine stirred, and carried the last of my bags to the rental car I'd picked up the previous evening. The house was quiet, almost peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. For a moment, standing in the kitchen where I'd made coffee with Margaret 10,000 times, I felt a pang of sadness. This had been my home, my sanctuary, the place where I'd built a life and raised a son and mourned a wife. Leaving it hurt, even under these circumstances, even knowing what Daniel had said, but some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some wounds couldn't be healed, and some consequences had to be delivered, no matter the personal cost. I placed 2 items on the kitchen table where they couldn't be missed. The first was the house key. My key, the one I'd carried for 37 years, now laid flat on the polished wood with a finality that made my throat tight. The second was a note, handwritten on my personal stationery, folded once. The note said, I heard what you said about me, every word. You wanted to wait for me to die so you could sell the house and move somewhere better. You called me dead weight, so I'm leaving. You won't have to wait anymore. But you also won't have what you were waiting for. Take care of your bills now. Take care of your life now. You're on your own. Dad. I read it one final time, then set it down next to the key. I walked out my front door at 5:47 a.m., got into the rental car, and drove toward the highway that would carry me west, toward Arizona, toward Helen's guest room, toward a future that didn't include the son who'd been counting down my heartbeats like a financial advisor monitoring an investment portfolio. I didn't look back at the house. Looking back would have weakened my resolve, and I had spent 2 weeks building this resolve into something unbreakable. By the time Daniel and Christine woke up around 11, neither of them had jobs requiring early mornings, I was 600 miles away, crossing the Oklahoma border, my phone powered off, my conscience clear. Daniel found the note at 11:23 a.m. I would later piece together what happened in those first hours from the voicemails Daniel left, each one progressing from confusion to panic to rage to something approaching terror. The first voicemail, 11:31 a.m., Daniel's voice uncertain. "Dad? Hey, I saw your note. Where are you? What are you talking about? You heard what I said? Can you call me back? This isn't funny." The second, 12:04 p.m., more urgent. "Dad, seriously, call me back. What's going on? Where did you go? Your room is empty. Your clothes are gone. Did you move out? Why would you do that? Call me, please." The third, 1:47 p.m., angry now. "What the hell, Dad? You just left? You just abandoned your own house? That's insane. You can't do this. This is my home too. Call me back right now." The fourth, 3:22 p.m., panic bleeding through. "Dad, please, I'm sorry for whatever you think you heard, but we can talk about this. Don't do this. Don't just leave like this. Where are you staying? Are you safe? Just let me know you're okay." I listened to them later that evening, sitting in a hotel room outside Amarillo, Texas, eating takeout Chinese food and feeling absolutely nothing except a distant academic curiosity. Daniel sounded genuinely distressed. Maybe some part of him actually cared, buried under the layers of entitlement and greed. But it didn't matter anymore. You don't come back from "he won't last another year." You don't rebuild trust from "he's basically dead weight." Some words are grenades that destroy the entire structure once they detonate, and Daniel had pulled the pin himself. I deleted the voicemails without responding. I deleted the text messages from Christine, each one alternating between apologetic and demanding. I blocked both their numbers, then turned my phone off entirely. Let them panic. Let them wonder. Let them experience, for the first time in 20 months, what it felt like to be completely powerless, because the real consequences hadn't even started yet. From what I later pieced together, Daniel and Christine spent Tuesday evening in a state of confused suspension, still believing this was some temporary tantrum that would resolve itself. I would cool down, come home, they'd apologize for whatever I thought I'd heard, and life would return to normal. They ordered pizza for dinner, charged to a credit card that was rapidly approaching its limit. Daniel called me 17 more times, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that I would never listen to. Christine posted on social media about family drama, fishing for sympathy from friends who had no idea what she'd actually done. They went to bed assuming morning would bring clarity, perhaps even reconciliation. Morning brought something else entirely. Wednesday, 6:47 a.m. Christine woke up first, reaching instinctively for her phone to check the time. The screen lit up with the brutal announcement, 3% battery remaining. She'd forgotten to charge it overnight. She reached for the bedside lamp, flicking the switch without thinking. Nothing happened. She flicked it again, then again, confusion giving way to the first stirrings of genuine concern. Still nothing. "Danny, the power's out," she mumbled, shaking my son awake from dreams I hoped were pleasant, his last pleasant dreams for a very long time. Daniel checked his phone, still charged, thankfully, though that wouldn't last long, and saw no alerts from the electric company about outages, no mass text about downed lines or emergency maintenance. He went downstairs, tried other lights, the kitchen switch, the hallway, the living room. Dead. Every switch in the house was dead. The refrigerator wasn't humming its usual background note. The digital clocks were blank, their LED displays dark for the first time since they'd been plugged in. The coffee maker sat silent and useless. "This is weird," he said, returning to the bedroom where Christine sat wrapped in blankets, the early November morning already chilly without the furnace running. "Everything's out. Everything." "Did a breaker flip?" Christine asked, grasping for the simplest explanation, the easiest fix. Daniel checked the breaker box in the basement, navigating the dark stairs carefully with only his phone flashlight to guide him. Every breaker was in the correct position. He flipped them off and on anyway, hoping for some magical reset, some technical glitch that would resolve itself with the electronic equivalent of turning it off and on again. Nothing changed. The house remained dark and silent and growing colder with each passing minute. He called the electric company. After navigating their automated system for 10 agonizing minutes, pressing numbers and stating his address multiple times for their voice recognition software that never quite understood, he finally reached a human being. "I'm calling about an outage at 2847 Maple Drive. One moment, sir. Let me check the account." A pause. Keyboard clicking on the other end of the line. More clicking. Then, "I show that service to that address was disconnected yesterday at the customer's request." Daniel's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "What? No, there must be a mistake. I didn't request any disconnection." The request came from Robert Harrison, the account holder. "Are you Robert Harrison?" "I'm his son. I live there. He didn't tell me he was disconnecting anything. I apologize, sir, but only the account holder can make changes to the account. If you'd like to establish new service in your name, I can transfer you to our new customer department. Wait. Can you reconnect it under his name? Not without authorization from Mr. Harrison. Would you like to start new service under your name? How long does that take? Our next available installation appointment is November 27th, approximately 2.5 weeks from now. There's also a connection fee of $175 and a deposit of $250 for new customers. Daniel hung up. His hands were shaking. His mind was racing, trying to process the implications. My father had deliberately disconnected the electricity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a technical error. This was intentional. This was calculated. This was... what? Punishment? Revenge? Some kind of message? Christine emerged from the bathroom, her face flushed with fury and something that might have been fear. The water isn't working. The toilet won't flush. What's happening? They spent the next hour on the phone, working through the same script with different utility companies. Water. Service disconnected at the account holder's request. Gas. Service disconnected at the account holder's request. Internet provider. Service discontinued at the account holder's request. In a single coordinated move, I had severed every utility that made the house habitable, every service that separated modern living from camping in an empty shell. He can't do this, Christine said, her voice rising toward hysteria. This is illegal. He can't just turn off the utilities while we're living here. But I could. Sarah Martinez had researched it thoroughly. The services were in my name, purchased for my property, and I had every legal right to discontinue them. Daniel and Christine had never established their own accounts, never contributed to payments, never become customers in their own right. They'd simply existed as ghosts in my infrastructure, using services I paid for, consuming resources I provided, never once thinking about who actually controlled the switches. They'd been living as parasites in someone else's infrastructure, and I had just flipped the switch. By Wednesday afternoon, they'd discovered the next catastrophe. The car was gone. Daniel had walked out to the driveway around 2 o'clock, planning to drive to the bank. They'd need cash if they were going to figure this nightmare out, maybe pay someone to help them, maybe buy supplies to weather whatever storm I was bringing down on them. But when he reached the spot where the Accord had always sat, he found only empty pavement and an oil stain. He stood there for 5 full minutes, staring at that oil stain, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. The car couldn't be gone. The car was always there. Daniel drove it every day, to the gym, to meet friends, to run the occasional errand when the mood struck him. The car was as much a fixture of the house as the mailbox or the front door. The car had been stolen. It had to have been stolen. Except nothing else was disturbed. The garage was untouched, his old bicycle still hanging on the wall hooks. There was no broken glass glittering in the November sunlight, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been on the property uninvited, unless I'd been here, unless I'd taken my own car from my own property. He called the police to report it stolen, still grasping for some external force to blame, some crime to pin on someone other than me. The officer who arrived looked bored from the moment he stepped out of his patrol car, a middle-aged man who'd clearly seen every variation of domestic nonsense humanity had to offer. "Sir, this car is registered to Robert Harrison at this address. Are you Robert Harrison?" "He's my father." "Is your name on the title?" "No, but..." "Then legally, it's not your car. If your father removed his own vehicle from his own property, that's not theft." The officer closed his notepad with a decisive snap. "This sounds like a family dispute, not a criminal matter. I'd suggest you work it out with your father." "I can't reach my father." The officer shrugged, his expression suggesting he'd heard that excuse before and found it unimpressive. "Not much I can do about that, sir. Have a good day." He left Daniel standing in the empty driveway, surrounded by the ruins of assumptions that had never been questioned until now. Wednesday night was when reality truly set in. Daniel and Christine ate granola bars by candlelight, the candles pilfered from some forgotten birthday cake years ago, now pressed into service as their only source of light. They couldn't cook. The electric stove was dead. The microwave was a useless box. The refrigerator had been off for 12 hours now, its contents slowly spoiling in the dark. They couldn't see properly, stumbling through rooms they thought they knew, discovering how unfamiliar a house becomes when stripped of electricity. They couldn't charge their devices beyond what their nearly dead car chargers could provide in Christine's car, a 15-year-old sedan that barely ran and definitely couldn't accommodate all their belongings if they needed to leave. They didn't shower. The water was off. They brushed their teeth with bottled water bought from a convenience store, spitting into the sink and watching the toothpaste sit there, unable to rinse it away. The toilet hadn't been flushed since yesterday morning, and the smell was starting to permeate the bathroom, creeping under the door and colonizing the hallway beyond. The November cold was seeping into the house without heat, infiltrating every room like a living thing. They piled every blanket they owned onto the bed, wearing multiple layers of clothing, but it barely helped. Frost would form on the inside of the windows before morning. "This is abuse," Christine kept saying, wrapped in 3 layers of clothing plus a winter coat, her breath visible in the bedroom air. "He's abusing us. We can sue him. We have rights." Daniel wasn't so sure anymore. My note kept echoing in his head. "I heard what you said about me. Every word. What had they said?" Daniel tried to remember, scrolling back through weeks of casual conversations, private jokes, throwaway comments about the inheritance. There had been so many conversations, so many discussions about after Dad's gone and once we get the house and when he finally kicks it. When had I been listening? What exactly had I heard? How long had I known? It didn't matter. Whatever I had heard, it had been enough to trigger this nuclear response. Thursday morning brought the knockout punch. A woman in a gray suit knocked on the door at 9:15 a.m. Daniel answered, unshowered for 2 days now, exhausted from a night of fitful sleep in a freezing bedroom, desperate for any news that this nightmare was ending. Maybe my lawyer bringing terms for reconciliation, maybe a social worker offering resources, maybe anything that suggested a path forward that didn't involve complete destitution. "Daniel Harrison?" the woman asked, her voice professionally neutral, her expression giving away nothing. "Yes?" "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm an attorney representing your father." She handed him a thick envelope, the paper expensive, the seal official. "You're being served with official notice to vacate these premises within 60 days. Another copy for Christine." She handed him a second envelope, identical to the first, then turned and walked back to her car before Daniel could formulate a response, before he could process what vacate these premises actually meant in practical terms. He stood in the doorway, holding the envelopes, his brain struggling to process this new escalation. Eviction. I was evicting them, not just cutting utilities, not just taking the car, actually forcing them out of the house through legal channels. From the house Daniel had grown up in, from the house he'd lived in for almost 2 years, from the house he'd assumed would be his eventually, had always assumed, had built his entire future around assuming. Christine read her copy and burst into tears. Real tears this time, not the manipulative crying she deployed when she wanted something. These were tears of genuine despair. "He can't do this. This is his fault. He invited us here. He said we could stay. Now he's kicking us out with nothing." "We have 60 days, Daniel said numbly, scanning the legal document. The language was cold, formal, utterly unforgiving, full of whereas and heretofore and the parties of the first part. And then, at the bottom, the sentence that made his blood run cold. "Failure to vacate will result in forcible eviction by law enforcement. Forcible eviction. The sheriff physically removing them. Their belongings thrown onto the lawn like trash. Neighbors watching. Everyone knowing they'd been thrown out of a house they'd been living in rent-free because they'd been too lazy, too entitled, too stupid to see the gift they'd been given and honor it." 60 days to go where?" Christine shouted, her voice raw. "We have no money. We have no jobs. We have no power. We can't stay here and we can't afford anywhere else." She was right, and Daniel knew it. Their credit was destroyed. Their savings, my savings, Daniel corrected himself bitterly, were gone, spent on frivolous purchases and restaurant meals and the comfortable lifestyle of people who thought money would always be there. Every apartment they'd looked at required first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and proof of income. They had none of those things. Not the money, not the income, not even a cosigner, because who would cosign for 2 unemployed adults in their 30s whose only address was a house they were being evicted from? Daniel tried calling me again, his fingers shaking as he scrolled through his blocked call history. Still no answer, just straight to voicemail, my voice cheerful and normal. "You've reached Robert Harrison. Please leave a message." As if nothing had changed, as if the man in that recording hadn't systematically destroyed his son's life. He tried texting. "Dad, please talk to me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Whatever you heard, we didn't mean it. Please don't do this to us. We're family." No response, not even the 3 dots indicating I was typing. Just silence. He tried email. "Dad, I know you're angry, but this is too far. You're leaving us with nothing. Mom wouldn't want this. Please, let's talk. I'm begging you." No response. By Friday, they were showering at Christine's friend's apartment, lying about why their water was out. They were charging their phones at the public library. They were eating fast food for every meal, watching their checking account drain with terrifying speed. The fights started Friday night. Real fights, screaming matches that carried through the cold, dark house. "This is your fault," Christine shrieked. "Your stupid comments about him dying. You couldn't keep your mouth shut." "You said he was dead weight," Daniel shot back. "You laughed about selling the house. Because you kept talking about it. You made it seem like a sure thing, like we just had to wait." She was crying again, mascara streaking her face. "Now we have nothing. Your father took everything." "He didn't take anything. It was always his. That's the whole problem. It was always his, and we just assumed." Daniel trailed off, the full horror of their situation settling over him like a burial shroud. They'd assumed, they'd planned, they'd calculated. They'd imagined a future built on my death, and they'd never considered the possibility that I might discover their calculations and decide I'd rather burn everything down than let them have it. The neighbors started noticing. The house was dark every night. Strange cars came and went. Christine's friends dropping off supplies, Daniel's former colleagues he'd called begging for help. Someone reported a disturbance when one of their fights spilled onto the front lawn. By the end of week 1, Daniel and Christine's comfortable life had been completely obliterated. Their relationship was fracturing under the pressure. Their dignity was in tatters. Their future was a terrifying void with no clear path forward. And I, the man they'd dismissed as dead weight, was comfortably settled in Arizona, sleeping soundly for the first time in years. The second week was worse than the first, because the initial shock wore off and grim reality settled in its place. Daniel and Christine couldn't afford to restore utilities in their own names. The connection fees and deposits totaled over $1,000 they simply didn't have. Christine's car broke down on Monday, leaving them completely without transportation. They were now walking to the library, walking to the gym to shower, walking to the store for food they ate cold because they couldn't cook it. November was getting colder. The house, unheated, became nearly uninhabitable. They slept in all their clothes, under every blanket they owned, shivering through the nights. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. "We could start a fire in the fireplace," Christine suggested desperately. "With what wood? We don't have wood. And we'd probably burn the house down, and then Dad would sue us for destroying his property." Daniel laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Everything's a trap. Every move we make just makes it worse." Their attempts to find emergency help went nowhere. Homeless shelters were full. Friends could offer couches for a night or two, not permanent solutions. Family, Christine's parents lived in a retirement community that didn't allow long-term guests. Daniel's only family was the father who'd orchestrated this catastrophe. Job applications sat untouched. How do you focus on employment when you're living in a dark, cold house, showering at the gym, and trying to figure out where you'll sleep 2 months from now? The immediate crisis consumed all their energy. The psychological toll was devastating. Christine developed a persistent cough from the cold. Daniel stopped sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. They snapped at each other constantly, every tiny frustration magnified by stress and desperation. On Wednesday of the second week, Christine's mother called. Somehow she'd heard about the situation. Probably Christine had broken down and told her everything. The conversation was brief and cold. "Your father and I raised you to be independent," her mother said, her disappointment cutting through the phone line. "You're 34 years old, Christine. You should have your own home, your own income. We're not going to enable this situation by giving you money." "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for help." "Help would have been you making better choices years ago. Figure it out." Click. Christine threw her phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. She collapsed on the floor, sobbing, and Daniel had no comfort to offer because he was too busy drowning himself. Thursday, a process server arrived with new paperwork. Daniel signed for it mechanically, beyond surprise at this point. This document was different, a formal eviction filing in civil court. Sarah Martinez's cover letter explained that since they'd been given written notice to vacate 2 weeks prior, the 60-day clock was ticking, and this court filing was the next procedural step. "Your hearing is scheduled for December 19th at 10 a.m. If you fail to appear, or if you fail to vacate by the designated date, a sheriff will forcibly remove you and your belongings from the property. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned and disposed of. December 19th, just over a month away, and then they'd be physically thrown out by law enforcement, their belongings piled on the curb like trash." The neighbors definitely knew something was wrong now. Mrs. Patterson from next door caught Daniel outside on Friday and asked, with poorly concealed nosiness disguised as concern, "Is everything all right, dear? We haven't seen your father in weeks, and the house has been so dark." "Everything's fine," Daniel lied automatically, then walked away before she could probe further. But everything wasn't fine, and the neighborhood gossip network would ensure everyone knew it soon enough. The successful young couple living with Dad had been exposed as frauds, freeloaders, people so incompetent they couldn't keep the electricity on. By the start of week 3, Christine began making plans to leave. Not the house, she had nowhere to go, but to leave Daniel. "This is your family," she kept saying. "Your father. Your problem. I didn't sign up for this." "You signed up when you married me," Daniel said, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Their marriage, already strained by unemployment and codependency, was cracking under this pressure. They could barely look at each other without sparking arguments. The resentment was mutual and growing. He blamed her for the comments I had overheard. She blamed him for the situation that led them to move in with me in the first place. Daniel made one final attempt to reach me. He drove Christine's friend's car to Martin Brenner's office, the lawyer whose name was on the eviction paperwork, and demanded to speak with someone about me. The receptionist was polite but firm. "Mr. Brenner can't share information about his clients. If you'd like to leave a message—" "Tell my father I'm sorry," Daniel shouted, loud enough that people in the waiting area turned to stare. "Tell him I didn't mean what he heard. Tell him I love him. Tell him we can fix this." Security escorted him out. He sat in the borrowed car in the parking lot and cried for the first time since this began. Not because he was sorry, though he was, desperately, retroactively sorry in the way people regret actions only after consequences arrive, but because he finally understood, with devastating clarity, that I wasn't coming back. I wasn't going to forgive them. This wasn't a lesson or a scare tactic. This was permanent exile, delivered by a man who'd calculated every step with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years engineering structural systems. They'd thought I was a soft target, an old man whose love for his son would override any practical concerns. They'd been catastrophically wrong. I was a fortress, and they'd been living inside my walls with my permission, and the moment they'd revealed their true nature, I'd simply closed the gates and left them outside to freeze. The third week ended with Christine packing her clothes into garbage bags. "I'm staying with Amanda for a while," she announced. Amanda was a friend from her boutique days. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this." "So you're just leaving?" "What choice do I have? Stay here in the dark and cold with you, waiting for the sheriff to throw us out. At least Amanda has power, and heat, and food, and she's not going to judge me for being a complete failure." "We're supposed to be partners," Daniel said weakly. Christine laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Partners? Danny, we haven't been partners in years. We've been two unemployed losers living off your father, and now that the free ride is over, I'm done. You figure out your family drama. I need to figure out how to survive." She left that evening, 4 garbage bags of clothes loaded into Amanda's car, and didn't look back. Daniel stood alone in the cold, dark house. The house that had been his childhood home. The house that was supposed to be his inheritance. The house that was now his prison. And finally confronted the full weight of what he'd lost. Not just electricity and water and transportation, not just my money and generosity. He'd lost my love, my respect, my willingness to see him as anything but a parasite waiting for the host to die. And the truly unbearable part, the part that kept him awake through those freezing November nights, was that I had been right to do it. Every brutal step of this punishment was deserved. Daniel had said those words about me not lasting another year. Christine had called me dead weight. They'd counted down my death like it was a financial maturation date. What father wouldn't retaliate? What decent human being wouldn't respond to that betrayal with righteous fury? Daniel had expected me to simply die and leave him everything. Instead, I had left him with nothing, and with the knowledge that he'd done it to himself. I'd been in Arizona for 3 weeks when Helen told me Daniel had found me. "He called this morning," Helen said, sitting across from me at her kitchen table, her face troubled. "I don't know how he got my number. He sounded desperate, Robert. He's begging to talk to you." I felt nothing but a distant curiosity. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you'd think about it. I didn't promise anything." She reached across and touched my hand. "You don't have to see him if you're not ready. But Robert, he's your son. I know who he is." "Margaret would want—" "Margaret isn't here," I said, more sharply than I'd intended. I softened my tone. "And Margaret never heard what I heard. She never knew that her son was measuring my life expectancy like an investment portfolio. If she had, I think she'd understand." Helen sighed, but didn't argue further. "He's staying at some motel on Route 40. He drove here, Robert, all the way from Pennsylvania. He says he'll wait however long it takes to talk to you." I considered this. Daniel had abandoned his disaster of a house, probably days away from the actual eviction now, and driven across the country to Arizona. That took effort. That took desperation. That took something approximating genuine remorse, or at least a very convincing simulation of it. "Tell him he can come tomorrow afternoon," I said. 2:00. Here, 30 minutes. That's all he gets? The next day felt longer than the previous 3 weeks combined. I spent the morning walking Helen's neighborhood, trying to prepare myself for seeing Daniel face to face for the first time since everything imploded. What would I say? What did I want to say? Was there anything Daniel could possibly say that would matter? At 1:45 p.m., a battered sedan pulled into Helen's driveway. Daniel emerged looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. His hair was unwashed, his clothes were wrinkled, his face was gaunt, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. He looked like exactly what he was, a man whose life had comprehensively fallen apart. I answered the door before Daniel could knock. We stood facing each other across the threshold, father and son, separated by more than just Helen's doorframe. "Dad," Daniel said, and his voice cracked on the single word. "You have 30 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let him enter. We sat in Helen's living room. Helen herself had tactfully disappeared to give us privacy. Daniel perched on the edge of the couch like he might bolt at any moment. I sat in the armchair across from him, perfectly still, waiting. "I'm sorry," Daniel began. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I never meant for you to hear those things. I never wanted to hurt you. You just wanted to wait for me to die," I said calmly, quietly, patiently, "while you lived in my house and spent my money and planned what you'd do with my estate. It wasn't like that. Don't." My voice, still calm, somehow carried enough authority to silence Daniel immediately. "Don't lie to me now. Don't insult me further by pretending you didn't mean exactly what you said. You told Christine I wouldn't last another year. You laughed about selling the house. She called me deadweight and you didn't disagree. Those are facts. I heard them. So don't sit here and tell me it wasn't like that when we both know precisely what it was like." Daniel's face crumbled. "You're right. You're absolutely right. We said those things. We were terrible. We got comfortable. We got lazy. We started seeing you as... God, I can't even say it. We saw you as an obstacle instead of my father. Instead of the man who raised me and loved me and gave us everything when we had nothing." He was crying now, tears streaming down his unshaven face. "I don't know how we became those people. I don't know when it happened, but you didn't deserve it. You didn't deserve any of it." I felt something shift in my chest, but I couldn't tell if it was softening or hardening further. "You're right, I didn't." "Can we fix this?" Daniel asked desperately. "Can we undo this somehow? I'll do anything, Dad. I'll get a job immediately. I'll pay you back every penny. I'll prove to you that I'm not the person you heard that night. Please, give me a chance to make this right." "No," I said simply. "No? No. We can't fix this. There's no undoing it. You showed me exactly who you are, Daniel. People don't fundamentally change. You and Christine spent 20 months living off my generosity while secretly wishing I'd hurry up and die so you could cash in. That's who you are. That's what you value. I can't trust you. I can't forgive you. And I certainly can't go back to pretending we're a normal father and son." "So what? That's it? You're just cutting me out of your life forever?" Daniel's voice rose, desperation giving way to anger. "You're going to let one overheard conversation destroy our entire relationship?" "You destroyed it," I said, still maddeningly calm. "Not me. You. The conversation I overheard just revealed damage that was already done. You think this started that night? No. This started the moment you moved in and decided being comfortable was more important than being independent. This started when you stopped looking for work and started playing video games. This started when you looked at me and saw a resource to exploit rather than a father who loved you." I leaned forward, and for the first time, emotion bled through my controlled demeanor. "I spent 40 years building a life, Daniel. I worked every day. I saved money carefully. I raised you and gave you every advantage. And when you needed help, I gave it without hesitation, because that's what fathers do. I would have supported you forever if you'd needed it, truly needed it. But you didn't need it. You chose it. You chose to be parasites. You chose to see my death as a financial event. And when I found out, I chose to respond. By destroying our lives," Daniel said bitterly. "By withdrawing my support," I corrected. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped providing things that were mine to provide. The electricity was mine. The water was mine. The car was mine. The house was mine. All of it was always mine, and you just assumed you'd inherit it when I was conveniently dead. Well, I'm not dead yet. I'm still alive. I'm still here. And I decided I'd rather have nothing to give you than let you have things you were waiting for me to die to claim. The eviction is legal and justified. You're not on the lease because there is no lease. You're not on the deed because I never added you. You have no legal claim to that house, and you've been there long past any reasonable hospitality. I gave you written notice. I followed every law. In 2 weeks, a sheriff will escort you out, and that will be the end of it. Where am I supposed to go? I don't know, I said, and for the first time my voice carried something that might have been sadness. I truly don't know, Daniel. That's your problem now. You're 42 years old. Figure it out. Get a job, rent an apartment, build a life that doesn't depend on me dying to make it work. I can't afford. Then you'll struggle. You'll work harder. You'll make sacrifices. You'll experience what millions of people experience every day, real life, without a safety net, without a parent subsidizing your existence. I stood, signaling the conversation was ending. Maybe struggling will teach you something, maybe it won't. Either way, it's not my responsibility anymore. Daniel stood too, his face a mixture of disbelief and grief. So, that's it? You're done with me? I'm done supporting you. If you manage to build an actual life, an honest life, maybe we can have a relationship someday that's based on something other than your inheritance expectations. But right now, I shook my head. Right now, you need to leave. Your 30 minutes are up. Dad, leave, Daniel. Daniel walked to the door, moving like a man in a dream. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, turning back one last time. Christine left me. She's gone. I'm completely alone now. Then you have something in common with how I felt when I heard you planning my death, I said. The difference is, I found a way to keep living. You'll have to do the same. Daniel left without another word. I watched through the window as the battered sedan backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened, examining my own feelings like a scientist studying specimens. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt something that might have been sadness, yes, but it was sadness over what Daniel had chosen to become, not over the consequences I had delivered. You can love someone and still refuse to be destroyed by them. You can care about someone and still protect yourself from their toxicity. Helen emerged from her bedroom, reading the situation with the emotional intelligence of someone who'd lived through her own share of family catastrophes. How do you feel? Tired, I said honestly. But right. Margaret loved that boy so much. I know, I loved him too. Maybe I still do in some way. But love doesn't mean you have to let people hurt you. Love doesn't mean you finance their dysfunction while they wait for you to die. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting people face the consequences they've earned. Hard lessons, Helen murmured. The necessary kind. I lived with Helen for 6 months before returning to Pennsylvania. Not to my old house. I sold that property to a nice young couple with 2 kids, people who saw it as a home rather than an investment waiting to mature. The sale provided enough funds to comfortably supplement my pension and establish myself in a modest condo near my old neighborhood. I never restored my relationship with Daniel, though I heard through peripheral channels that my son had eventually found work as a warehouse supervisor and was renting a small apartment across the state. Christine had divorced him. Daniel was alone, rebuilding slowly, learning what I had hoped he'd learn, that life required effort, that comfort had to be earned, that parents weren't infinite resources to exploit. My updated will remained unchanged. Helen would inherit most of my estate. Various charities would receive bequests. Daniel would receive his $1 and a letter explaining, one final time, exactly why. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too harsh. Sometimes I imagined alternate scenarios where I'd confronted Daniel calmly, given him chances to reform, built bridges instead of burning them. But those scenarios always collided with the memory of that overheard conversation, those casual words about my impending death, that laughter at my expense. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, because forgiving them would require pretending they hadn't revealed fundamental truths about who people really were. I had spent 3 years mourning Margaret. I'd spent 20 months supporting Daniel's parasitic existence. I'd spent 3 weeks systematically dismantling the comfortable lies my son had built. And now, for the first time since Margaret's death, I was spending my days actually living, not as someone's resource, not as someone's inheritance, not as someone's dead weight waiting to clear the way for their ambitions. Just living, just being, just existing as myself, for myself, accountable only to my own conscience. My heart, that supposedly failing heart Daniel had been counting on to quit, kept beating steadily. My days accumulated into weeks, months, years, and if sometimes I felt the ghost of what might have been, a relationship with a son who'd valued me as a father rather than an estate, I balanced that grief against the deeper satisfaction of refusing to be victimized. Some fathers left their children money, some left wisdom, some left nothing but disappointment. I left my son with $1, a harsh lesson, and the cold comfort of knowing that the old man who wouldn't last another year had outlasted our relationship entirely. And somehow, in the quiet peace of my new condo, surrounded by photographs of Margaret and memories that belonged only to me, that felt like enough. The end. I heard them counting down my death, so I taught them what it meant to face consequences while I was still very much alive.